They sent me to prison for 5 years for growing weed. And when I got out, it was legal. It's hard to imagine all the pain and suffering caused by antiquated laws. I didn't grow the most weed. Of course, I did grow some of the best.
I grew weed for Willie Nelson. I grew weed for Snoop Dogg. I grew weed for the love of freedom. I grew weed for God. And I grew weed for New York City. I grew weed for LA. I grew weed for the great state of Texas. I grew weed for the USA. And I grew weed for little Billy Clinton, though he did not inhale. I grew a whole bunch for heaven and a little bit for hell. I grew weed, I grew weed, big old buds from little bitty seeds. I grew weed, I grew weed, big old buds from little bitty seeds. I grew weed. I grew weed for the FBI. I grew weed for the DEA. I grew weed for the lawyers to make it legal someday. And I grew weed for the prisons who locked me away. I grew weed for the snitches just to give them bitches something to say. And I grew weed for Wiz Khalifa. Well, I was on the inside. Folks say, how could you do that? Well, I did it with my mind. I grew weed, I grew weed, big old buds from little bitty seeds. I grew weed, I grew weed, big old buds from little bitty seeds. I grew weed. My neighbors, I grew weed for my friends. I grew weed for Martha Stewart, Joe and Seth Rogen. And I grew weed for Beyonce, Rihanna, Jay-Z and crew. I grew weed for your mama and your daddy too. I grew weed for the sick, grew it for the poor. I grew a little for my own head, and then I grew some more. I grew weed, big old buds from little bitty seeds. I grew weed, I grew weed, big old buds from little bitty seeds. I grew weed. I grow a lot on the farm today, but I don't grow weed no more. Now that it's legal, I just buy it from the store. I grew weed, I grew weed, big old buds from little bitty seeds. I grew weed, I grew weed, big old buds from little bitty seeds. I grew weed.
Now that's a fun song, but you know what isn't fun? Going to prison. And that is why I am calling for the immediate release of all marijuana prisoners, the federal descheduling of cannabis, and the full pardon of all marijuana convicts, because no one should be in prison for weed, and no one should be held back in life because of a criminal record for a plant. And if you feel the way I do, please join me in sending this message to the president. The time to act is now.